Sean Diddy Combs has been arrested in a Manhattan hotel this evening after a grand jury indicted the music mogul.
Washington Post, just one question, did he or didn't he?
What are they now trying to do with these witnesses in order to prove the sex trafficking and racketeering?
Welcome to a special edition of the 25th Hour, the trial of Sean P. Diddy Combs, with your hosts, Bianca Forde and Alyse Adamson.
Welcome to another episode of the 25th Hour. This season, we are diving into Diddy, specifically the trial of Sean P. Diddy Combs, cultural icon, music mogul, who is facing very serious federal charges, inclusive of RICO conspiracy, transportation to engage in prosecution, and as we know, sex trafficking. The witnesses that we heard from Alyse this week were Mia, who's testifying under a pseudonym. She's a former assistant of Sean Combs and also a victim in the case. We heard from Eddie Garcia, who is the IHG employee who accepted about $100K and split it amongst his friends to suppress that video from March 2016 of Sean Combs brutally beating Cassie. We heard from Derek Ferguson, who's the former CFO of certain Bad Boy Enterprises. We heard from Brianna Bongalin, who is a friend of Cassie, who Sean Combs allegedly dangled over a balcony. And then we heard from Jane, victim number 2, also testifying under a pseudonym and still on the stand. So lots went down last week. What are your reactions and thoughts about it?
I don't really even know where to start. I think it was an uneven week. I think it started off strong for the prosecution. I think Mia was a good witness. We talked about this last time. I think her testimony, if it is to be believed by the jury, very damning. There was reporting that certain jurors were, perhaps aligning with some of the defense on cross. But all in all, I think that was a win for the prosecution. I think Eddie Garcia was very good for the prosecution. The prosecution established bribery through him, getting paid $100,000 for that tape. But, toward the end of the week, Brianna Bongalin and now Jane, so far, I think we're going to put that in the defense column, and we can, unpack that a little bit more. But Bongalin, from all accounts, was kind of a disaster. And Jane, in my opinion, just from what I've read and all, I don't have the entirety of the transcripts, but the testimony was, held close to the vest by the prosecution. We didn't really know what she was going to say. And I'm just not hearing sex trafficking.
So I agree with some of that. I guess, Bongalin, the fact that she was sort of undermined by the date of the text message and when it was sent. She testified that she took a picture of her injuries after Sean Combs allegedly dangled her over a balcony, and she was very specific about what date that happened. The picture had a specific date on it, but then we found out that he was on tour at that time. Now, you and I have both tried cases. We've seen when people are fuzzy on dates and you use the evidence to refresh them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the incident didn't occur, right? But we weren't in the courtroom, so we don't know how credible she came across. But it sounds as though the defense was not very happy about it. And tell our viewers about this weekend bombshell.
Well, yeah. Before we get into this bombshell, let me just add a little bit more color on Bongalin, though. Yeah. It starts off, she gets onto the stand and she pleads the fifth. And for people who don't know what that means, she basically said she wasn't going to testify because she didn't want to incriminate herself, which means something in her testimony meant that it was potentially illegal. So, that's not a great way to start. They gave her immunity, which meant anything she said, the government could not, charge her for. And she admitted to both doing drugs and selling drugs. So she testified that she was high as a kite most of the time. That's strike one, right? We go to credibility, and a lot of these witnesses have admitted to drug use. So I'm not just saying this with respect to Brianna Bongalin, but when you put everything together, it just was not a good look. Then it's more than just the pictures. She said she sustained injuries from when Combs picked her up and then slammed her on some hotel patio furniture. And she described them in detail. She's like, it was a bruise and there was a puncture mark in the middle of the bruise and I hurt my neck. And the government produced a photograph of her with the neck brace and the bruise. But here's the thing. The metadata of the photo, and that's that now everything is so high tech that a picture actually records when it was taken. The picture was taken several days before this event in question supposedly happened. And the defense's point is that they have travel records to prove that Combs was actually on the East Coast the day that photo was taken. So it calls all this to question. Now, of course, the prosecutor in me is like, well, was he really in the East Coast, or did he just have a hotel in his name? And we're going to have to figure it out. But the bombshell is based on all of this. This weekend, the defense filed for a mistrial. They filed papers to the judge and said, look, you need to throw out this entire trial because the government put a known liar on the stand. They're saying it was prosecutorial misconduct and that they suborned perjury, that they knew that because they had this photo in their possession, the government did, they knew that Combs could not have possibly have been on the West Coast to commit this crime of throwing her over the balcony because they knew she was on the East Coast and that she's a liar. And then they went further and they started talking about like hotel railing heights and saying Combs is only 6 foot. There's no way they can dangle her. And to me, that's like a distraction because that's something for a jury to conclude, and they can put on what's known as a rebuttal case, like bring someone up there to testify about how impossible it would be for a 6 foot man to do that. But the stuff about the prosecution's putting Bonglin on the stand with the date mix-up is more interesting to me, right? Like witnesses don't always remember dates, but if the defense demonstrates that Combs was really on the East Coast when Bonglin sustained those injuries, it does call all of her testimony into question, right? Like it goes beyond just like poking at slight inconsistencies. That to me is a bombshell.
On whether the testimony was really clear on what date this happened, right? We know that Cassie actually testified about the balcony incident. So it's not clear to me yet, and I haven't read the defense motion for a mistrial, but it's not clear to me yet that she was attempting to use this photo to suggest as corroboration for these injuries, as opposed to just being a little fuzzy on the date. And as to the immunity, several witnesses in this trial have testified under immunity agreements, including Eddie Garcia, and that doesn't necessarily, the jury can make of that what it will, right? To me, that doesn't in and of itself diminish her credibility, but I will say, what does she add either way? Like if her testimony is, they're probably not going to get a mistrial because we know that's a drastic remedy. We know that defense attorneys file mistrials throughout the trial. I usually don't see them more than one time, but they happen. So, I think that it would be a drastic remedy, but if her testimony is stricken, as you and I were chatting about, what do they really lose? She shows a violent man. We know that already, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it was just further corroboration to the coercion because remember, to prove this sex trafficking charge against Cassie, the government really has to prove that she was coerced, that she was forced through like threats and violence to do these freak offs. And the government has to deal with text messages from Cassie that says she likes doing freak offs or agreeing. So they have to show that even though Cassie was saying those words like on text or out of her mouth, that she really didn't feel like she had a choice, and showing that Combs would dangle someone over a 17-story balcony, that really goes to coercion. I mean, at this point, I think this is a hard case for the government. I think they benefit from every account of him doing really scary things to be able to say, yeah, that's why Cassie didn't run away. And I just want to be clear about this timeline on Bonglin, which is why I do think this is a problem for the prosecution. So Cassie sent a text message to Christina Karam. That is Sean Diddy Combs. That was like his right-hand woman, like his chief of staff. She sent him this text messages like September 29th or September 30th, something like that. But immediately after this incident and said, something just happened. So that's like the timestamp of when this incident happened. The pictures are from September 26th. So it just, I agree with you. Like there might be a way to parse this out to make the timeline work, but as it stands right now, because nobody really has like a definitive date, but what we do know is on the 26th, when the picture was taken, Sean Combs' schedule had him in New York. So like I'm saying, there's a chance that even though his schedule had him in New York and his hotel room was under his name, maybe he was on the West Coast. But the fact of the matter is the picture was taken on the 26th of September of 2016, and his schedule and hotel records has Combs in New York on September 26, 2016. So at least it looks bad. Yeah. And I agree with you. I don't think the judge is going to grant a mistrial because of that. But it doesn't look good. And not only does it undermine Bongolin's testimony, but it makes the prosecution look bad. I mean, the prosecution doesn't want to make mistakes like that, because if the judge does have to clean it up and he tells the jury, ignore everything you just heard that woman say, or the defense is able to put on evidence that she's a big liar. Well, even though they don't get to tell the jury that the prosecution was engaging in misconduct, jury might think the prosecution was trying to pull the wool over their eyes, right? I mean, that was always something we were worried about, leaving the misimpression of the jury. And as the prosecutor, you have to be the most credible person in the courtroom. Can't really make those mistakes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. You said something else that was interesting in terms of the prosecution needing to show that these sex activities happened under duress and threats. But they also can prove coercion by showing economic harm, right? And psychological harm. And that's where I think Mia, as well as Jane, really came in, because they both testified, as well as Cassie, right? Cassie testified to a degree about fear about the impact of her livelihood, records not being released. But Jane talked about the fact that she was having her rent paid to this date, actually, to the date of her testimony, because of the love contract that they entered into back in 2023. She testified, I think her testimony really supported some of the sex trafficking by fraud, because she would hop on planes with the expectation to spend this one-on-one time with her romantic partner, and then suddenly while in transit or upon arrival, there was this third man, this entertainer, that would be arriving so that Sean Combs could fulfill his sexual fantasies vis-a-vis Jane. So I thought, some people have sort of, I've gotten some messages about, what's the line between personal agency and coercion in this case, right? With these power dynamics, with this gender-based exploitation. And I think it's important to really remember that that scheme of coercion can include serious harm, which also encompasses threats of psychological harm and economic harm. And Jane was really strong on that, in being fearful about, losing her home. She said at some point, because of all these, she called them hotel nights, Cassie called them freak-offs, but because of all of these hotel nights, she couldn't earn her own income, right? So if the jury finds that credible, right, and if the jury is able to sort of understand that in this context, under this law, the fact that that whole argument that why didn't you just leave? The law actually takes that into account by recognizing the psychological and economic harm that these witnesses and victims may have suffered.
Listen, I'm going to tell you this. I'm torn about Jane. I'm going to be very honest with you, because I heard everything you said. And if you and I were evaluating a case, I would probably say, you're right, let's charge it. It could be fraud, right? I hear you on the technical point, but I've been trying to put myself in the shoes of a juror, because I've gotten some comments on some videos I've done, said, I don't think you're right. Lawyers, we understand lawyers have to think this way and strategize, but they don't really know what jurors think. And I'm thinking, Jane's a little bit different than Cassie. And to be fair, at the time of this recording, the prosecution is not done with her direct testimony. There could be more coming out. She was supposed to be on the stand for about 5 days, I think was the estimate. She's been on for maybe 2. But Combs started paying her rent, but she was a successful influencer before she met Combs. So I'm hearing the argument that if suddenly she stopped doing these things, Combs would stop paying her rent. But this woman was making money before Combs. That's different than Cassie. Cassie was 19 years old. She didn't have nothing when she met Combs. Her entire lifestyle was provided by this man. She grew up under this man. Jane, not so much. She was an older woman, not older. I mean, she wasn't a teenager. She's still young. I mean, come on. But she was not a teenager. She was already a mother. And she was from what I understand, a successful influencer making her own bag. And so her influencing career took a hit because she was dedicating so much time to Combs. But if she had left that relationship, according to Combs, he bought her veneers. He even upped her even more. She could have probably gone back to what she was doing and made more money. So I'm thinking as a juror right now. I'm not thinking as a prosecutor. And what I'm thinking is, well, couldn't you have gone back and been successful without him? And all this fraud. I mean, maybe, first of all, she admitted that at the beginning of their relationship, it was just the two of them. He shared his fantasy with her, and then she agreed to do it.
She was exhilarated.
She was exhilarated. And then it started happening regularly because now we know that that is the kink that Combs lives in, right? That is the kind of life he wants to have. But is it really fraud? Because she knew who he was at that point.
Yeah,
And she made it known. She was like, I just want it to be the two of us. And he would say things like, you know, you need to be on your job. I'm on mine. Like, I'm paying your rent. You need to be doing what you're doing. And she did it because she wanted her rent paid and she wanted to be with her man. Is that really fraud if he has already shown you who he is? She was hoping he would change, but he wasn't making any promises that he was going to change. He was just saying, I'll stop paying your rent. And again, she had been a successful woman before that.
Sure. If I'm a juror, I am sort of sitting there detecting the breadcrumb complex that you often see in relationships, where someone is so desperate for someone's love and attention that they accept the breadcrumbs, right, that they're able to get. And there's a part of Jane's testimony that definitely comes across that way. But I can see the theory that the government here is proceeding on in terms of the economic harm, the psychological harm. And it sounds as though her demeanor on the stand sort of supported this, vulnerable woman that Sean Combs was really able to exploit for his own purposes.
I don't know. I think the sex trafficking counts with Cassie, it sounds like she was groomed. I actually think the government has met their burden 6 ways to Sunday there. It just depends on whether the jury credits her testimony. So far with Jane, I'm not sure. I would benefit from having the transcript in front of me. I want to give the prosecution and Jane, because she is a victim. Don't get me wrong. She is a victim. I'm just not sure that the government has met their burden with respect to fraud, but she's still going to be on the stand. Let's see how it goes.
But to your point, but for, including both Cassie and Jane as victims, RICO would not exist. Right? It's unlikely. I mean, I guess it could.
It would exist with Cassie. It would.
The statute of limitations would have expired on a great deal of Cassie's conduct, the conduct involving Cassie.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, as I've said, this is a technically complicated case, and it was charged. I think, didn't they add her count in April? They added 2 counts. In April. It was originally a 3-count indictment, and then it became a 5-count indictment. I know they added the allegations about the firearm in April. I'm not sure if they added her. I need to look. But anyway, the prosecution knew they had to beef their case up right before they took this to trial, and they added 2 counts, and it's called a superseding indictment. So they tightened it up, bringing it to trial. Because we said it before, this is a unconventional way to prove a RICO, or to bring a RICO case.
Very creative.
It's very, very creative. And as you said, should we be doing it? I need to hear more. I want to hear from Christina Karam. Don't you want to hear from her?
Oh my gosh, so badly. And I wonder if she's made some public statements, right? I think after Cassie's complaint was filed, Christina Karam came out to talk about how devastated she was that these allegations were lodged against her, and refuting them and saying she's never done anything illegal, she never witnessed any abuse, etc. So it is going to be fascinating to see whether she takes the stand and under what circumstances she takes the stand. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm thinking. Like, so I think the government has another week and a half of witnesses, maybe more. They said that their case in chief, that's what they call where they're putting on all the witnesses, was going to be shorter than they had initially thought. So looking forward, I want to hear from Christina Karam, and I want to hear from D-Rock. Like, these are the people that were highest up in the Combs enterprise, as they call it. We hear their names mentioned constantly, but we haven't heard from them. With the RICO, we've talked about this all the time. We've been making these jokes, like Diddy seems to be in this RICO by himself. And these are all,
right?
These are all
required to charge other conspirators.
You're not, but it makes it tighter. I mean, it's a conspiracy. So you're having a conspiracy without another co-conspirator. And I mean, allegedly, if you read the civil lawsuits against Christina Karam, and these are all allegations, okay? I'm making this very clear. These are allegations. She has not been found civilly liable at all. These are just filed suits, but they have named her as a co-conspirator in the civil RICO. So if she's in the position to be a co-conspirator in the civil RICO, you have to imagine she has information that would be relevant to the conspiracy in this criminal RICO. So can we hear from her? Now, of course, she'll probably have a fifth, but they have been immunizing people. They've been allowing people to testify and not prosecuting them. So, like, why not get her up on the stand? And for people who don't know, the government has subpoena power. So that means they can issue anyone a subpoena. And if they choose not to come to court, they can arrest you and force you to go to court. So that other victim 3 that didn't show up, everyone's like, oh, she's in hiding, she didn't show up. Man, if they wanted to find her, they would send the U.S. Marshals so fast. It's not a good look to bring a victim to court in cuffs. So they decided it wasn't worth it. But if they wanted Christina Karam to testify, they could compel her testimony. So where's she at? Like, I'll be looking for that in the next week and a half. I think they need that.
Right? Yeah, I think, there's a lot of information that can potentially come from Ms. Coram. The fact that she's named as a civil conspirator, I wonder whether the government looked at the facts there and the evidence and thought they couldn't make a case against her beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's why she's not named as a co-conspirator. What do you think?
Don't know. I mean, here's why I don't want to speculate. Because we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. We don't know if there's a sealed indictment out there. We don't know if there's already been an immunity agreement made. We just don't know. So it's very, I mean, maybe they felt like there wasn't enough evidence there. The allegations against her are pretty well articulated if you've read that civil complaint. But you're right, the government has a truckload of evidence in this case, and maybe those allegations could not be backed up with the receipts. I don't know. But if they don't put her on the stand, the jury is going to be left with a lot of questions. And remember, when we were prosecutors, defense would say that. They're like, well, you've heard about so-and-so throughout this whole trial. Why didn't so-and-so, why didn't the government bring so-and-so to talk to you? And then the jury's like, why didn't they? It leaves questions in jurors' minds. You don't want to leave any questions in jurors' minds.
What else? What else is on your mind for this trial?
I don't know. I mean, I think at this point, I really just need to see how the government's gonna close their case in chief. Because I think they're close, but I think this is a novel theory. And I just think that to tighten up everything they have, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. These jurors need to be firmly convinced. And just because I think the government has hit every element doesn't mean the jury is buying everybody's account wholesale, right? So I want to see like the final nail in the proverbial coffin. I want to hear from the high level supervisors. I need that RICO. We already have like those racketeering activities. Okay. Government gave them to us. We got the arson. We got the bribery. We even got the sex trafficking as to Cassie. We got the forced labor through Mia. We just need a little bit more about that RICO conspiracy so they can't say it's domestic violence. We need more, a little bit more. So that's what I want to see. And there's been a lot of text messages about folks being willing participants. I would love to see more documents where people are saying no, or it's supportive of the government's case. Now, I understand most people do not put their criminal activity on paper, not the smart ones. But if they have more receipts, phone calls, text messages, I'd like to see that too. So that's what I'm going to be looking for because Bianca, the defense has now said that their case is going to be longer than they anticipated. So these folks, this is what did they say? They're reporting it's like a $10 million defense team. They are going to spring into action, just tearing this case apart. And they're always going to cast some doubt. That is a defense attorney's job. These are all very good legal practitioners. So that's why I'm saying the prosecution is going to have to just tighten it so it can withstand those cuts, and they can come back and say, okay, well, you've heard this, and that, but to your point, you just said this, they're just kind of throwing things against the wall, but in the totality of the circumstances of the evidence, you can see what actually happened here. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. And I'm getting ready for this defense case.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. You mentioned they might have hit the technical requirements, and I think largely they may have. Right? They have to show in terms of the RICO existence of an enterprise. Well, that's easy. He has a bunch of businesses. It affected commerce. He's associated with it. It's that pattern that gets a little interesting, right? The continuity of it, and whether or not there's a common purpose that everyone is working toward. And what makes this so interesting is the common purpose here is just so different from anything that we've ever seen. Right? Fulfilling one's sexual desires, protecting their reputation, and concealing their misconduct. This is very different. So I agree with you that if I'm the jury, I'm sitting there and I'm really trying to grasp, is this really a RICO, or is this some demented, violent man who picks vulnerable women to be his partner and then uses them to engage in activities that, other women may say no to and walk away from, right? So it's really going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
You know what else is going to be interesting? Like, if they get a conviction, if Combs is actually convicted on these counts, this case is going to go up to an appellate court, like a court who's going to have to review all these transcripts. And just so people know, like, appellate attorneys, they don't get like the action in the courtroom. They don't see the drama. They read these cold transcripts. But these transcripts are not going to be boring. And because this is a new way to use the RICO, it is going to be it would be a very hard fought appellate case. Like, as I'm hearing you talk, I'm like, an appellate attorney is going to just have a field day if this guy is convicted of the RICO. The prostitution charges, I think the government has like a slam dunk there. Yeah. It's this, and the sex trafficking, if she's believed, I think we've got it. But the RICO, it is an interesting way to prove a RICO.
Yeah, and it's that question of, if the government could have made a sex trafficking case for one of these victims and can make a number of the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, why was it necessary to even charge a RICO, right? Like, why do we believe that someone has to spend 25 years or 50 years to life in prison for them to be adequately punished for the conduct that they committed, right? That raises a question. But the other thing you just said that I find really interesting in terms of a conviction being secured here is what this means for other organizations and enterprises, including corporations, right? This is just the salacious activities aside. RICO, if there's a conviction here, it really establishes how easy it is to prove a RICO case, right? Because Congress intended for RICO to be flexible in terms of the pattern that was established, et cetera. That's why only 2 are required. That's why they can be 10 years apart. Imagine being the CEO or a senior official within a corporation, and you have a couple of people who are, paying bribes consistently. Now, all of a sudden, we have a RICO case for a corporation. So, I think that the implications of this, well beyond this world of entertainment, into corporate organizations, is actually quite substantial if a conviction is secured in this case. And to your point, if any of the Supreme Court justices have to talk about freak-offs, I'm going to make sure that I sign up and I'm sitting in the courtroom because it's just a couple miles away.
I'll be right there next to you.
Yeah.
Do you have any, those are all my thoughts. You got any thoughts rolling into this week?
No, I think that we're sort of aligned in I would like the sketch artist, though, to step up his game, right? I was a little disappointed with the presentation of Nicole Westmoreland this week. It brought back images of, earlier times in the world of caricature that was not favorable to African.
Just say it. It looked like blackface.
It looked like blackface. Okay, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, but listen, step it up. She's a beautiful sister, and be a little bit more thoughtful in your presentation, sir.
Didn't Combs say he looked like a koala? Wasn't that the feedback?
Like a koala. And apparently this isn't unusual. Apparently Donald Trump, and I think it may have been the same sketch artist. Donald Trump told his sketch artist, "Hey, make me look sexy," which is an impossible feat for even the most accomplished sketch artist in the world. But anyway, those are my final thoughts.
Well, if the sketch artist is listening, which we would appreciate it, and thank you, maybe step it up a little bit, or at least help Miss Westmoreland, because she is a beautiful woman. So do her justice. Do her justice.
At the very least, right?
All right. Well, we'll be back next week breaking down what would be probably the end of Jane's testimony, and also probably close to the end of the government's case in chief. And as always, if you liked what you heard here today, go ahead, like, subscribe, and we'll be back with another Diddy Debrief next week.